Yeah.
Damn, I should have got some pizza.
Pizza.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to come back in and...
The Human Torch was denied a bank loan.
The Human Torch was denied a bank loan. We don't have anything else to talk about except just get into the Raspberry
let's just
Pi.
talk about the
paste.
Raspberry
Cool.
Pi. And
Excellent.
I think we could cover an hour with that easily.
How much time do you guys usually take for the second half?
That was fairly short first half, wasn't it? That was
45 minutes.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah.
We got a solid hour.
Okay.
So yeah, just go talk about whatever you want to talk about. We're going to let you run with it. And
All right.
Yeah, and we'll prompt you with some of the
Someone's going to accuse you of doing it all in the closet. I guarantee you that.
First and foremost.
That was last week, dude.
That was this week, dude. the beginning of the episode.
Sorry, I got really drunk last week. I'm just saying.
No.
So did I. I didn't feel real good on Friday.
I'm not going to feel real good tomorrow. I'm planning on it.
Right. Well, I can tell. Like I said, you got that look in your eye. All right. So welcome back. We had a couple really nice beers at the break here. Stubby broke out a quad that he did. That one of my favorite beers I've ever tasted from him. Really, really good.
Yeah, it was a good beer. Yeah.
Actually, we drank 2 quads. It was a double quad break.
Yeah. So the second half should
Only
be
way to
interesting.
do it.
Yeah, we're kind of loosey goosey now.
I planned this.
So we want to get into talking about the Raspberry Pi controlled fermentation that Mike has been doing for a while.
Right.
I guess we should probably back up a little bit and,
Yeah, I
and talk
think
about
so.
exactly what a Raspberry Pi is.
And
for
I think
those
that,
of us
I
who
think
don't
that
know.
would be a great, and maybe Mike, you could explain to us exactly what is Raspberry Pi, and I mean, in really layman's terms, kind of tell us
easy.
exactly what is Raspberry Pi in general.
All right. So Raspberry Pi is basically a really cheap, inexpensive, credit card sized computer.
Okay, that's easy enough.
Yeah, it's a very small computer. It's got an HDMI port so you can see stuff. It's got USB ports. The latest ones have built-in Wi-Fi.
And if you go on Amazon and Google it, it's Raspberry Pi. Pi is just P-I, not P-I-E. There's all kinds of them available. They're really affordable.
So this is like a 46 SX or something like that.
I don't know how
like
fast it is, but it's got an SD chip for the hard drive, basically.
Hello.
There are
Welcome
a
back
lot
to
of
Come and
people
Brew
who build
Radio.
their own laptops or desktop computers off of these things, or build video game
But,
emulators or that kind of thing. They're just kind of a general use computer.
Well,
if you
here's
wanna
an
build
example.
something.
So you remember this past Christmas they had the whole the little mini Nintendo.
Yeah, the Nintendo Classic. Yeah.
So I wanted to get one for my wife because she loved Zelda, Super Mario Brothers growing up. So I thought it'd be a real eclectic gift, to get her. And so I looked, and of course I couldn't get one because they were the hot items. So after talking to a guy at work, he's like, "Yeah, Raspberry Pi has great software for that. It's called RetroPie." I was like, "Okay, cool." So I bought a Raspberry Pi, and I bought a couple controllers and downloaded the RetroPie software, and now we can play any Nintendo, Sega Genesis, Super NES, any games that we want. Of course, we own the games physically before we download them and play them, so we're not breaking any laws. But
Disclaimer.
yeah, we're not doing anything illegal. We own the games already, but it's nice to have everything in one spot. So Raspberry Pi again is just a little computer. You can buy it for like $15, I think, and it's just a little chip. About the size of a credit card, or you can spend $30 or $40 and it'll come with a little kit with a little case.
yeah, there's
it'll
all
come
kinds
with
of
a
different little
cable, power
enclosures you can
cords.
buy.
Yeah, it comes with all sorts of stuff. So for the purposes of fermentation, I bought the one that came with a little case, and it had the USB cable, had the power cable. I had because I wanted to mount it to the side. I didn't want to have to do all the case myself.
Right. So it's like a little project box kind of thing.
It's better, even better than that. It's
Okay.
they've got the holes cut out for you already for the USB ports, the HDMI ports, the power, the SD slot. They already have everything cut out for you. So if you're going to endeavor a project like this, you really need to get the ones that come with some kind of a case.
Okay.
Well, and you can buy them completely put together and ready to go too if you want. You can kind of pick your poison.
Yeah.
If you want to buy the kind of case you want and all that kind of thing and put it together, you can. Or if you just want to buy one that's going to show up ready to use, you can do that too.
Yep.
Right.
And even those are pretty inexpensive.
So basically, this is a computer that you can buy, but it's really inexpensive. but you still have to tell it what to do, right?
Well, it runs
Right.
off of open source software, right?
Yeah. So for fermentation, there's two parts to this project. You have the Raspberry Pi, which is the computer, which serves the web pages that I can go connect to and take a look at where my fermentation's at. It shows graphs and all this cool stuff. That's what the computer's hosting. The second part of this project is the controller, which actually controls the fermentation, and that is that's the controller, the Arduino chipset. So,
Arduino, right?
Arduino, yeah.
Arduino, yeah, okay.
Yeah. And so if you look at what I have on the screen now, you can see there's two black boxes there. The bottom one is the Raspberry Pi, and the top one is the little project box where I have the Arduino chipset in. So there's two pieces to this.
And for those of you listening on the podcast, they basically just look like
Two boxes.
two
Black
external
boxes.
hard drives, two black plastic
maybe
boxes, yeah.
external hard drive, maybe a good.
Yeah.
And the Arduino is like that actually controls the switching and transmission of power, right?
Right. So the Arduino is a programmable chip, and you don't have to do any programming. The Raspberry Pi software does it, flashes it for you, but it's just a little chip that you just have to do some wiring, and you had to cram all that shit into a little box. That was probably the hardest part of this project, was to find a box that wasn't too big. And this one was the one that I got, had a little battery compartment in it, and I had to use a little hacksaw to cut some parts out of it just so I could make enough room for everything. But
Right.
but for the most part, Arduino chipset, you don't have to do any special programming, just wiring. You follow a diagram, wire it up, and that's what I endeavored on this project, because it
All
wasn't
right.
too
So
complicated.
I think what we need to do, because I'm completely confused, and I think maybe we need to back it up and explain to our listeners exactly what you were trying to accomplish and what you used to accomplish it. You know what I mean?
Start from the beginning. What was your goal?
Okay, so I had a glass carboy, and when it came time to ferment,
Popcorn.
when it came time to ferment, I stuck the probe to the side of the carboy and insulated it,
right.
and controlled fermentation that way, and it worked great. I didn't have any problems. It seemed like beers were turning out fine, and then I decided to buy one of those Speedles. So I wanted a large fermenter, so I bought a Speedle. Well, that's plastic.
Right. Big difference.
Yeah, and I thought, okay, so I don't think putting a probe and taping it to the outside of a Speedle is going to work.
Yeah,
Just because plastic doesn't doesn't
Transfer the heat.
transfer the heat,
yeah.
yeah.
Right, and
Conduct
so-
the heat, yeah.
And so before I did my
conduction.
first beer, I thought, how am I going to control fermentation? So I thought, well, I guess I'll buy a thermal well and drill a hole in the top of the lid and do a thermal well. Well, that sucked, because if you try and control fermentation with just a simple controller like the
Johnson controller.
anything that's
Right.
just a simple on and off, you'll find that it just swings like crazy.
Yeah.
And so I had a lot of problems with the first beer that I did with this. And I'm like, man, I can't, I mean, this thing would swing 3 degrees C because it's so big.
All
And
right.
by the time the air
Were
in
you
the
doing
chest
10 gallons, I guess? Or
yeah, 9 gallons with it.
Okay.
And by the time the air in the chest freezer was cold enough to reach inside of the Speedle,
Yeah.
that air is really cold. And then when it cuts
Shut
it off,
off, yeah.
shuts off, that cold air just keeps going, and it keeps working its way into the beer, and it finally gets so cold in your beer. And so, I had first couple of beers, the yeast would flock out too early because they just I was having some issues. And so I thought, I really need a controller that can anticipate these, the way that the plastic fermenter is working. And that's when I found this Raspberry Pi, and I read up on it. There's a great forum post on Homebrew Talk that has all the details, the schematics. And by this point in my brewing history, I was able to know enough about electrical to understand how to hook this up. And I thought, you know what, I think I got about 90% of this. I think I can do this. And so that's when I went and bought the parts and just said, I'm going to jump in and do this. And
Okay, so I mean, I think that's a good starting point. What do you think that? I mean, so, and I tell people this a lot of the times even if you're putting a carboy or, and a lot of times most brewers are doing 5-gallon batches, and when they put it in and they, I got a Johnson temperature controller, and I tell people a lot of times that a lot of people think that it's okay, you can just throw the probe into the refrigerator, Well, the problem is that you're not measuring the actual temperature of the beer.
Right.
So you're measuring the ambient temperature. So if, let's say, for example, you put you're doing a lager and you put your beer in there and it's 50 degrees and I set my temperature controller at 50 degrees and it's just sitting in the cooler. Well, the air may be 50 degrees, but your beer may still be 70 something degrees.
Right.
And it may take, I don't know, 6, 8, 10 hours before it actually evens out.
Mm-hmm. Well, plus once the yeast starts working, it creates heat. I know that when I was taping my probe to the outside, I had one fall off one time during active fermentation, and when I put it back on, there was a 10-degree difference between the ambient temperature and the temperature of the beer. So there's a big difference in trying to control the ambient temperature and use that to any degree of control. It just doesn't work.
So,
and the other thing too is the thing where people will say, get a jar of water and put it in there and put your probe in that jar of water. That doesn't work either. No. Again, your yeast is creating heat when.
Well, and that's a smaller volume of liquid. Yeah.
And it's a smaller volume of liquid, right?
Yeah. You think about it. If you're doing 5 or 10 gallons, especially even 10 gallons, you're doubling your mass.
Yeah.
It's really difficult to. If you got it just in a mason jar, even you're talking about a quart of water, and you got that stuck in there. You got this big mass of water. I mean, you're going to have a hard time. I mean, there's no way in hell that big mass of beer is going to be the same temperature as this little mason jar or whatever you got it stuck in. Or
one of the other things I'll point out too, since we're talking about thermal wells and that kind of thing, what I have found, and you can watch this. I have a pretty decent controller, but it's not like a PID controller or anything like that. It's the Ohm Brew.
Yep.
That's a programmable one, and one of the things I noticed using a thermal well, that has a probe that is itself a thermal well, so you don't have to put it in a thermal well.
You might explain to our listeners too exactly what a thermal well is.
A thermal well is basically a tube that goes down into the beer. So when you put your temperature probe down in the middle of this, it's essentially reading the temperature of the liquid inside the liquid without actually putting the probe into the liquid.
Well, and I'm going to take that a step further. And for you guys that are not temperature controlling your beer, this is the number one thing that will increase in the best. I mean, I tell people this all the time. If you don't have temperature control for your beer and you're doing extract beer, don't go all grain until you have the ability to do temperature control fermentation. And I don't care if it's just a refrigerator and you're just putting the damn probe inside the refrigerator. It's better than doing room temperature fermentation, because I think a lot of people think, okay, well, it's 75 degrees in my house and or 72 degrees in my house. I keep my house at 72 degrees. But what they don't realize is that yeast can actually produce almost 10 degrees difference in ambient temperature by fermentation.
Right.
They create heat. There's some chemical reaction going on there. So, and I just want to make this clear to people that are, they may not understand what we're talking about, is that we're trying to control our fermentation temperature even more so than just using a temperature controller.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Right. You're trying to measure the temperature actually of the beer itself, and not the ambient temperature or anything like that. So this is one of the reasons I use buckets instead of carboys. Is what I have found, because you can watch your temperature controller. I'll put mine in. Typically, it's 80 degrees or so when I put it in my fermentation chamber. That's about what I get it down to when I'm
in Texas.
Yeah, we're in Texas. That's just a reality. And you can watch I'm going to set the temperature for 63 degrees, and it'll drop and drop and drop, and then just like Mike says, it's a large thermal mass, and by the time it hits that temperature that you want it to be, and the refrigerator cuts off, that's still going down in temperature because you're waiting for the thermal mass to work its way to the center where your thermal well is.
Well, what I have found is even at 5 gallons, that's a lot of mass.
Right.
I mean, that's a lot of mass. Even a refrigerator is not designed to cool that big a mass. I mean, really. I mean, you got a lot of little stuff, you know.
Well,
I
it's
mean,
not designed to hit a target.
Right,
A refrigerator
exactly.
It just runs.
Right. So what I have found is if you take that thermal well and you don't put it in the center, you put it halfway between the outer edge
should
and the
help.
center, and that makes a difference. And I've watched as the wort adjusts temperature when you're cooling it down, it doesn't dip so far below where it's supposed to hit before it goes back.
And I
to
think
it. It
we even
ramps
need to
right
go
to it a
even
little
more
bit better.
rudimentary than that. Explain to people what a thermal well is.
We just did.
Did you? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the whole point of using a Raspberry Pi for
I had too
fermentation.
much quad
You told me
already.
to do it a minute ago, and then we did. Yeah.
Well, I just want to stress that
Have some beers, Debbie.
the whole point of having the fermentation controlled by Raspberry Pi is not necessarily for precision. Like I'm not trying to get the temperature to stay at 0.02 degrees C without plus or minus 0.02. The point isn't precision. It's about making sure that you're not getting wide swings.
You were looking to minimize the
swings.
spikes.
That was
in
the
temperature.
motivation
Right.
by it, right? And so, and
And we're going to see a couple graphs here to illustrate
Yeah,
exactly
I
what
can-
he's talking about.
Yeah, so the fermentation controller it's really easy to. It's really not that hard to build. You can see a picture there. I put magnets on the other sides of the boxes so they just adhere to the side of the chest freezer, which is kind of nice.
Is that just like a project box you get on Amazon?
Yep,
Or?
I bought it at Fry's. Yeah.
Okay.
And so it sticks to the side of the chest freezer. I plug the heat side in. I plug the freezer side in. And the way the Raspberry Pi works is it tries to shoot the internal ambient temperature of the chest freezer. It aims to adjust the target temp of that to achieve the fermentation temp that you want. That's what the Raspberry Pi software is doing for you. So let me say that again. So it's constantly evaluating what temperature does the chest freezer have to be at to get the beer where I want it to be. It's
Okay.
evaluating that, and it's
So it's like
measuring that.
it's like a very similar like a PID kind of.
It uses PID. Yeah, no,
Okay.
it uses PID. So you
Okay.
control the PID parameters, but it's measuring the ambient temperatures of the chest freezer, and it's constantly changing the target temperature of the chest freezer, ambient temperature, in order to achieve what beer temperature you want.
Right. Okay.
And so you have two probes that you're really using with this thing. One measures the ambient temperature of the chest freezer. The other one is going inside your thermal well.
I don't think I ever picked up on that before when I've heard you talk about this. I
Yeah,
didn't
when you
realize
actually
there was
get-
two.
yeah, I didn't
that
go
makes
into
a lot
that
of
detail.
sense, actually. Yeah, okay.
And so that's what it's constantly setting a target temp of the chest freezer. And so over time, it sort of figures out that I need the chest freezer to be at 63 to keep the beer at 66.
Okay.
And so it's trying to keep the chest freezer at a certain temperature ambient wise.
But it's smart too because it learns it actually learns. Okay, well this time I raised it up to 63, but my beer only got to whatever, right? Or it didn't.
It has a
So it
special,
kind of it starts to learn the curve, right?
Yep. So the Raspberry or the BrewPi software tries to figure out how long is it taking me to get, when I kick the heat on, how long does it take to heat it up? When I kick the chest freezer on, how long is it taking to reach my target temp? It's using that information along with the PID parameters to get it tuned. So, like I said, it just takes a little bit of electrical. It's not like, I don't know if any of you guys have ever built the STC 1000.
Yeah, there's
When
a
those
lot of
things came
people
out-
that do that.
Yeah, it's the wiring is no different than that.
Okay.
It's not that difficult really. As far as getting the Raspberry Pi set up, you can follow a few steps. Type this stuff in, hit enter. You don't have to understand what it spits out. Type this in, hit enter. It spits out some stuff. That is not hard. The only challenge I had was I did run into one problem at the time that I was doing this, and I had some Linux background. And I was able to figure it out on my own. But I think for the most part, you can just follow it step by step, and it works. So, and the other thing that's kind of cool about this is that because it's running its own little web server that you connect to look at the graphs and everything, I've set up my router at home. And this took a little bit of my own just networking, and I have a background in networking and software and things like that. So,
Yeah, not me.
I have it set up so that I can access my BrewPi over the internet. So I had to do this on my own. I set up some credentials on Apache which is the web server it uses to authenticate me, so that I couldn't get a random hacker coming in and fucking up my beer.
Yeah, that would suck.
Yeah, so
Beer hackers, the Russians. They ruined my Imperial Stout.
no, but it comes in handy because
hilarious.
literally I will be at work and I'll be like, I'm going to check on this guy, and I'll pull up my brew pie and see what the fermentation temperature
See,
is. And I'm like, I think it's time to raise it, so I'll bump it up a little bit.
That's exactly what I would like to do, to be
Yeah.
able to control it remotely. I'm even so lazy that I would want to just be able to do it from my couch and not have to walk out into the garage.
Yeah, well, and,
You know?
in this case, you have to access it over the web to change anything. So you going and walking to your garage doesn't serve any purpose at this
That's
point.
perfect for me.
You have to use your phone or your computer or something like that.
Jeffrey Griffiths. Jeffrey. I'm going to go with that.
Oh, man.
Will a Pi Zero be powerful enough?
A what?
Pi
Pi Zero is a version of Raspberry Pi.
I don't know what Pi Zero is. I can't tell you. I can tell you that this is such a low.
It's a pie that tastes exactly like a Raspberry Pi, but
I think
has
it's
no calories.
I think it's a calorie-free pie.
Yeah, it's a calorie-free pie.
Well, I can tell you that the amount of
kind of like
Griffiths.
hair pie.
Jeffrey Griffiths. I can't read
the
my
resources that this thing needs is for in terms of how much it needs to store or what kind of processing power you need. It's so low. It's
It's got to be nothing, really.
I mean, it's my cell phone is.
Yeah, the Arduino or Arduino, however the hell you say it, that actually does the switching of power and turning things on and
the
off.
Raspberry Pi.
Tell us what the Arduino is, or what.
Yeah, so it's
that
just
is.
it's a programmable chipset, and that's what communicates with your relays to kick things on and off.
No more quad for Stubby.
Well, I mean, I'm serious. I mean,
think about it, though. I mean,
I'll be honest with you. I don't know any of this shit.
No, I've looked at it. I've read it. I've followed his posts, and I just can't figure out what's going on.
When you guys
Arduino
are
is
saying
basically
Arduino, I don't know what the hell that means.
Okay, so think for a second. So if I want to kick my chest freezer on, I got to have some sort of a relay, right?
Yeah.
The
'cause
Raspberry
Raspberry Pi can't handle that amount.
Yeah,
of
it's
power.
just a
it doesn't even.
computer.
It has no idea how to do relays. You know,
Right.
it's just got a USB port, and so the Arduino chipset is something you can program that will know how to when to flip relays on, when to flip them off, and it hooks up to the Raspberry Pi with a USB port.
Okay.
And so
So do you actually plug your refrigerators into this Arduino thing?
Yeah, if
or
you can
whatever?
pull up the picture, I can.
It had the two.
So the two little
the
dongles
two
at the bottom.
dongles coming
I
out.
wired that myself, so it's just two AC plugs there that are. And that top box is a container for the Arduino.
Okay,
And then
so
the bottom one there is the actual Raspberry
Raspberry
Pi
Pi,
itself,
yep.
which is just the computer chip.
So the Arduino, can you tell us what do you know what the amperage is? Does it handle a 15
I can't
amp?
tell you
or-
that.
yeah.
I can't tell you that.
Okay.
So,
you
Taylor,
could-
this does not.
You couldn't
kill the
use
fun of
that
brewing.
for like brewing, running your elements on your brew system.
I don't know.
Now
Maybe.
the if you go to the Brew Pi page, the company that makes a Raspberry Pi control box for brewing, they say that it will run heating elements, but they don't have the software. And it's been like this for about a year.
Okay.
It says that they're working on software to make it.
So it
turn
probably
on.
is. It probably can't handle that amperage.
I think it's
then.
going to have to use the Arduino, but it will do it. The software hasn't been worked out to make it do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I mean, you're probably talking a 15 amp circuit with like a refrigerator and stuff like that. I mean,
But again,
whatever.
all the Arduino is doing is taking the information from all the Raspberry Pi is doing is taking the information from the Arduino
Arduino is
and
just
giving you access to it on a web page. That's all Raspberry Pi is doing. The
Right.
Arduino has its own, like when you set all this up, you flash the Arduino with the PID software. So the Arduino is doing its own thing. It's just that the Raspberry Pi is just pulling it.
That's your
saying-
interface.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's-
the
it's-
Arduino's doing is the actual controller.
Right. The Raspberry Pi is the thing that connects it to the web, and the Arduino is
yeah.
the one that's actually doing
Here's
it.
the thing.
Yep.
Here and this is not to be facetious or anything. I'm completely confused and I don't know anything and I'm really I'm just saying that
I
just
agree.
saying that, I'm just saying that from a standpoint of I'll be honest with you. I probably would just like most of the listeners tonight. I'm kind of confused because I mean I understand some of the aspects of this particular thing that we're trying to talk about tonight, but you know, it's like, okay, Arduino, what is
Well, like
a
the
Raspberry
Arduino,
Pi, you know.
the Arduino is basically like
Arduino.
the Johnson controller. That's the Johnson controller device that's
Right.
turning on and off.
Right.
So
your
okay,
chest freezer.
that's a good
Okay.
analogy.
That's the
The-
mechanical side of it.
That's
Yep,
that's what's
exactly.
running the.
Okay,
that's,
so
that's turning
basically
it on
what
and
you're
off.
saying is that the Raspberry Pi is telling the Johnson controller when
No,
to turn
it-
it on and off.
Nope.
The Raspberry
No?
Pi is only
Is the
getting
Johnson
information
controller.
Yep.
from the Johnson controller.
Yep.
The Johnson controller is telling the Raspberry Pi, I turned on at this temp, I turned off at this temp. The temperature of the beer was this temp. That's all it's telling you,
Yeah,
right?
all the Raspberry Pi is doing is letting me look at what the controller is doing, which is the Arduino. The Raspberry Pi is my web server. That's it.
Okay.
And then the Arduino is the Johnson controller
Right.
that's turning stuff on and off.
So this is all super nerdy stuff. So if
Absolutely nerdy.
So we can get to the why, right? So I mean,
Yeah,
you can
yeah.
do all
Let's
this
get
stuff.
to the why, because there's a segment of people who understand what we're talking about, and the people who don't, Google
Like
it,
me.
because you're going to be able to see some. You're going to be able to see some visual things that'll make you understand it a little bit better.
Well, I think all of these things. I don't really understand everything, but I think all of these are very applicable type things that you can use to make your beer better.
No, you can, because when you brew, you have a method of controlling your fermentation. Let's say you have a glass carboy and you put your probe to the side of it. When you brew a really big beer, what do you put your fermentation temperature at? Let's say that you really want to ferment this thing, really ferment it at 67, and it's a really, really big beer.
Right.
If you're like me, if it's a really big beer, I think I'm going to set my temp to 64 just to be safe, because I know that it's going to produce some heat, because fermentation produces heat. I'm guessing. I think I'm going to put it at like 64 so that it, maybe it'll hover around 67 when it's fermenting. I'm guessing
and the thing
at this
is
point.
that it's going to take, because you're dealing with raising and lowering the temperature of something that has a lot of thermal mass. By the time your controller says, okay, this is getting too warm, now I'm going to kick on the refrigerator kicks on and starts to cool it off, it's going to be a few degrees before that catches up and then lowers it back down. So what you
Right.
end up doing is swinging back and forth between about 63 and 66 or 67 degrees.
And there are people out there that know that I've brewed this Belgian quad a dozen times, and I know that if I ferment it at 64, I get the beer that tastes good. I've done it at 67, I've done it at 66, I've done everything, but I know that if I set the controller at 64, I get good beer. That's fine. But but at the same time, I like to know what is the actual temperature of the beer while it's fermenting, because if I want more fruit out of this or less fruit out of this, I want to make adjustments. But if I'm a numbers guy, I'm an engineer, I can't. The guesswork is not good enough for me. I have to know what it is actually doing.
Well, we talk a lot about stressors on yeast, and if you're going to put a stressor on your yeast, you want it to be intentional, and you want there to be a reason to do it, that you're going to get a particular flavor out of it.
Right.
But a lot of the times you want to remove all the stressors from the yeast and let them be comfortable and happy doing what they're doing. Temperature swings are a stressor.
Right. They are.
And so you want to minimize that if you can, or if you're going to have temperature swings, you want it to be intentional.
Yeah.
And I was just showing a visual of, my set point is 64 degrees, but that's what
Actually happens,
Typ-
right?
Did you show it to the camera?
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is. I'll show it again. This is essentially what's happening with your
Right.
typical controller. Is it turns on?
You're ending
And-
up with an average
right.
temperature, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
It turns on. It goes. Oh, okay. Now we're there. Okay, now I'll turn off, and you go down, and then I need to turn on again, and it comes up.
So one of the benefits of having this setup is I have data, right? I can see it's recording the temperature of the beer, the ambient temperature of the chest freezer, and it keeps that data. And so when I did this presentation for the Cap and Hair, I thought, how cool would it be to do some experiments to figure out, what if I put my probe to the side of the carboy versus putting my probe inside of a separate jar of water that's inside the chest freezer? I want to know, what is the actual beer temperature with these different setups. So some people, like you can look at the screen right now, you can see some people will have an external probe that is connected to the little jar of water to the outside. The graphics kind of just skewed there, but the controller is actually going into the jar of water. I want to measure the temperature of the beer with a thermal well and see how much does that beer fluctuate when I control temperature through the jar that's to the side, right? That's one style that people use to control fermentation. They don't tape it to the side. They put it to it, like I think Stubby, you said, you were talking about that.
Ambient temperature.
Yeah, right. And so if you can go to the next graphic, you can see there's another setup where I can measure the temperature through a thermal well. So in this setup, what I'm doing is I'm using the brew pie to record the temperature of the beer while I'm controlling temperature through a thermal well at the same time through a regular controller. This is the Johnson controller style.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
this is controlling temperature through a thermal well versus a jar on the side.
Which a thermal well, it's the actual probe into the actual beer rather than the ambient temperature.
Right.
Yeah, rather that or even having a separate, container of water to the side,
or
right?
water or whatever. We were talking about that earlier.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there's another way. If you can go to the next graphic, you'll see that, some people will
Is that not the right?
Nope, next one.
Next graphic.
Next
yeah.
one. Okay.
Okay.
Well, some people.
maybe
That's
I
okay.
missed
That's okay.
Mr.
Some
Graph.
people insulate the probe to the side of the carbo as well. So,
Right.
what you're seeing here on this picture is what is the difference in temperature, right? So, the blue line shows you what is the temperature of the beer from the set point. So, right now, if you can see the numbers, that blue line is starting at like 11 degrees, which means that
Difference?
Difference.
Okay.
This is a difference graph. It's showing you the bottom 0 means it's 0% different. Means there's no difference in the temperature from what I'm measuring in the actual beer. So if you guys are fermenting your beer and you're putting your probe inside of a separate container of fluid, you can expect about a 10 to 15 degree difference,
Yeah.
which is awful.
Yeah, that's
That's
awful.
huge, yeah.
That's huge.
You don't want to do that, right?
No.
Can we go back to the graphic because there's more stuff there. All right, so if you're insulating your probe to the side, that's the red line. You can see it starts out kind of high because it's making its adjustments,
Right,
but as
it's making-
things start to cool down, it starts to it does a pretty good job.
It's actually really good, yeah.
Yeah, it does a pretty good job. And this is what at the top you can see I have glass carboy. So this is the experiments conducted with a glass container.
And that's an important distinction because
Yep.
the glass conducts the heat a lot better than
Right.
plastic would.
does, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
So if you're fermenting your beer and you're insulating the probe to the side of a glass carboy, you're doing a pretty good job. It's going to keep it pretty close. Now the green one is if you're controlling it through a thermal well, and you can see all the humps. It does
Yeah.
a decent job, but you can see the swings. It's doing
Okay.
a lot more swinging because it's controlling it from the inside
So
of the
from
beer.
your-
And it's controlling it from the center of
center.
the liquid
Yeah, this
too,
is-
which is
that's right.
On a carboy. That's the only choice you have.
Yep. Yep.
So let me ask you this. So you were saying that actually taping it to the side of a carboy would be better than actual in the center of promo?
With a regular controller, yes.
Okay.
And a
Okay.
and a glass carboy.
According to
Yes.
your research.
Yep.
Oh,
Because the
interesting.
controller is not going to do any sort of learning. It's just going to be a simple
Yeah,
on
it's
off,
on
right?
and off, right?
And
Correct.
so if you're going to use a controller like a Johnson controller or the STC 1000 or whatever the newer versions of that
Right.
are,
Which just turns it off and on
right.
according to the temperature.
Yep. Insulated to the side of the glass carboy. My research has shown that is going to be the most accurate way to do it.
Okay. Okay.
And I've actually heard
Fantastic.
Jamil talk about that years ago too. That there was some research that was actually a very effective way of measuring temperature.
Okay.
And I'll go back to what I'm talking about too, about the thermal well being in the very center of the liquid. I think makes a difference because you're putting that probe as far away as possible
Right.
from the edge of the
outside where the heat is
Yep.
is
Yeah.
getting into.
That makes sense.
That's one of the reasons I was saying with the bucket, I drill that hole off center,
That makes a lot
halfway
of
between
sense.
the center
Yeah.
and the wall,
Well,
and that I've found that makes for much smaller temperature swings.
Well, and that's what's funny is, if you talk about that, and I think that's a very good point because a lot of times that, if you think about it, I've even seen guys do like, their ice box or whatever, and they freeze stuff in the keg, and, the whole outside of this thing freezes, but the center stays,
right? Yeah.
not frozen. So, it's. I think. I would think you would think, from just a general standpoint that when you're trying to freeze something or you're trying to get something cold, it gets cold from the outside in.
Yeah, that's just the way conduction works. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
so-
I've even read on like the stainless conicals from a couple different companies. They tell you that you're only going to get 1 degree temperature diff if you put a probe on the outside of the stainless conical versus a thermal well in
center.
the middle. So,
Which I would be
they're
willing
saying
to. I would be willing to probably even debate that. 1 degree is all the difference.
that's what I've read. But basically, they're saying is don't bother with the thermal well. Just like Mike's saying, insulate your thermal your
Right.
probe on the outside of
when
that
we say
vessel.
insulate, what we're talking about is you're basically going to have to tape this thing to the side of what your fermenter is, whether it's carboy or conical or
Yeah.
whatever.
So in these tests, what I did is I took like those little bungee cables you use for moving and stuff. I put bungee around the carboy, and I just take like a dish towel and fold it a bunch of times.
You need a towel or bubble wrap
Something
or
to keep
something
it-
that just insulates it from the outside air. So the reading you're getting is the probe touching the fermenter itself.
Whereas if you're
and not
fermenting-
the ambient air.
But I would be willing to bet you that, and this is just from my own observation, I would think that you would probably need to have. It would be better off if you're fermenting in plastic to actually have the thermal well inside, maybe to the offset.
I agree.
Yeah, and that
Yeah.
was what drove me to
Yeah.
do this, because I got
Yeah,
a
that was
plastic
the whole
fermenter, and
motivation,
I was
yeah.
like, I can't measure the outside of a plastic fermenter. That's just not going
Right.
to work. So if you can show the next slide. I think I have some more. Okay, so now this is with the Speedle 30 liter. So this is a plastic fermenter. Same test. So with the plastic fermenter, the blue line is showing you what the external probe does. And the red line is look at that insulated probe.
So for those of you that are listening on the podcast aren't able to watch along live with us, which is most of our listeners, the last time when we were looking at an external probe, which was just a probe that was measuring the ambient temperature, that was a solid 10 to 15 degrees higher than what the temperature of the beer itself was. With this one, it starts off about 10 and then comes in much lower, probably more along the lines of 5 degrees for the most part.
Yeah,
5
and that
to
has
7
I think that's
degrees.
a lot to do with the way the plastic is absorbing a lot of that.
Yeah.
Instead of where the glass would transfer it straight into your beer, I think
Right.
the plastic is doing a lot of that absorption of it. And
Well,
it's-
and I think as the temperature of the beer changes, it takes longer for the plastic to then change also. So there's a lag time between
Right.
the temperature change and the reading that changes it.
and I will also say this is with water. This is not with an exothermic beer.
Right.
I need to preface
Okay.
that. This is just water. I didn't have this many beers.
And I imagine that would completely change the
It changes
whole
things, right?
thing because you're actually producing heat with the yeast too. So
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it would probably throw everything even further out of spec. But what's really interesting here is the insulated probe, where in the last one where we're talking about a glass carboy, it really, once it settled in along that line of temperature, it stayed right there. In this case, over time, it got further and further out of spec to where it was
Yeah.
about 8 degrees lower than what the actual temperature
I thought
was.
that was the most interesting thing. Out
That
of
is
all this.
really, really interesting. I'm surprised. Now, one of the things, the Speedle fermenters have much thicker plastic
They
walls
do.
to
So
them
you
than,
explain-
say, a bucket or something
Yeah.
like that.
Well, explain to me what an insulated probe would be. Would that,
We just
would that
did.
be?
Like
I mean-
a bungee around the fermenter that's got a
Oh, okay,
dish
okay.
towel holding the probe against the fermenter.
You're cracking me up, man.
But yeah, I mean,
Is hey Zach, is Stubby's headphones on a delay? Okay.
but
Quad
that-
delay.
I mean, that just goes to
I've
speak
used-
to the fact that the plastic fermenters, it's absorbing
Hey,
everything, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
When you first explained this, I really thought, I know there'll be a difference, but I don't think it'd be that big of a difference. That is a massive difference. I'm
Massive.
really
Speedles
surprised.
are really thick plastic. This is not
Yeah.
your regular fermentation bucket. This is really thick plastic.
But what if
too.
it was half? You're still talking about 5 degrees. You know, that's huge.
It's
Yeah.
yeah,
Four or
it's
5
still a big
degrees,
difference.
yeah.
Yeah.
So if you pull up the same picture there, because I think there was a couple more there. So of course
Yeah.
the doing a thermal well, you still got the fluctuation.
Yeah,
not quite as bad.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I think what's interesting about the thermal well is that, I mean, even though there's fluctuation, it's still pretty linear.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean?
It is constant, but it's up and down plus
it's up and down,
a couple degrees C.
But I mean, other than the external probe is
Oh,
probably
is this Celsius?
close, but
Yeah, he's doing it all in C.
but
That's what I'm
I
measuring
would
it at,
think
but-
that I mean me as if I looked at that, I think I like the idea of that thermal well being more of a linear
Right.
You know what I mean?
You're right.
Rather
And
than-
you know what? I come to think of it, I think I did translate everything to Fahrenheit because people don't know.
Okay, good, because I thought, man, 10 degrees Celsius
No,
is
this is all
huge.
Fahrenheit.
Yeah, okay.
But going what Stubby's saying, he likes that constantness of it. But in this case, there's a purple line there, and you can't see it. It's the brew pie. This is what the brew pie did.
because
and
it
it's
exactly overlaps 0. Yeah, okay.
Pretty much.
Uh-huh.
You can't see the purple line because it is within like 0.02 degrees C.
Wow, that's awesome.
It keeps it at such a steady temperature because it's able to use that PID. So this is why I went with the Raspberry Pi.
Now, where is that brew pie?
So the brew pie does 2 measurements. It does the thermal well. It controls through the thermal well, and it also measures the ambient air and tries to keep the 2 in sync.
Okay. So it's taken both of them
Yeah.
for that
But
line.
for this
it's both
particular
of 'em.
test, the purple line is showing you what is the difference from my set point if I control fermentation with the brew pie.
And you know, this is one of the funniest things, you know, from my standpoint of brewing. And man, I was kicking ass and I was taking names and I was winning all kind of competitions and stuff, and with all of my recipes. And I got these big conicals and I put them in this big true cooler, and then I had a thermal well right in the middle of my conicals, and I'd never done it that way before. And all my beers were turning out like shit compared to what I was brewing. And
Because your temperature was way different than what it was. Yeah.
because I was just measuring my ambient temperature, and I was like, and I put it into the same temperature. Well, what I realized is, man, you know what? I'm fermenting a lot colder than what I originally fermented at. So what I had to do to correct for that, I actually had to bump my temperature up.
Okay, I have to do the same thing. So that's what I was going to next. So
Yeah.
I've been doing this for about 1.5 years now, and I found that as I've translated the Brewing Classic Styles recipes,
Right.
I found that I have to bump the temperatures up a little bit because I think that most people don't have that exact fermentation control.
Right.
And so, when I want to ferment a beer at 68, like let's say I need it's a British ale and I want some of the fruitiness out of it,
Right.
it may call for a 65, 66 fermentation
Degree,
temp,
yeah.
but I got to do it at 68 because I'm actually getting 68. So, especially like a Weizenbach is a great example. And Brewing Classic Styles, he's like ferment that thing at 63.
Right.
And I found that I
Yeah.
just don't get the richness out of it
Right.
at 63. I got to go at 65, 66. And it's because it's a big beer. If you're using a glass carboy,
Right.
you probably want to set it at 63 with a typical controller because it's going to be producing heat, and you're probably going to really get an actual fermentation tip at 65, 66. But
Right. Well, then that's a great point, because I had all these IPAs that I was just kicking ass with in competition, and I was actually fermenting, I think 65, 66 degrees in my cooler or whatever, and then I got this, and I was like, man, it just didn't have the well-roundness, it didn't have the esters or any of that stuff, so I had to actually bump my temperatures up because I was thinking, because they weren't the same. You know, I changed my fermentation, and that's a good point to think about anytime you change any process in your beer making, you have to kind of really dial it back and think, okay, well, what am I changing? How am I changing it? And how is that going to improve my beer, or is it actually going to change it so much? If you're brewing world-class beers and then you change the process, you have to think about what you're changing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I thought I was trying to improve my process and by putting a thermal well and having these big conicals and all of that. But actually, I actually took a step back, and I
Well,
had to
what you're
realize
doing is
why.
giving yourself a bigger degree of control, but just like going from extract to all grain where you're giving yourself more control, you're just creating opportunities to screw up too.
Yeah,
and so you're right.
exactly.
You have to analyze every little thing. Exactly what is the purpose of what I'm doing?
I
I
killed it with that Stubby's IPA recipe forever, and then I got all this control, and I made it with these conicals and stuff, and they just didn't have the same pop and the same. They were just
Speaking
kind
of pop and well-roundedness, this El Dorado Pale Ale is out of this world.
Isn't that good?
Yes, it's really good.
You know, let me.
That's
tell you,
actually a kit. I'm just saying.
that's one of our kits, and I completely butchered the the hop schedule because I missed an addition and I threw one in and then the alarm's going off, so I'm throwing another one in, and by the time the last alarm goes off, I'm like, well, shit, I'm out of hops. I don't know what I'm doing.
So here's another interesting point.
It's so moist, dude.
It's just juicy and moist.
So here's another interesting point with the ability to actually see with the brew pie. You're able to see your ambient temperatures alongside your fermentation temperatures, and one of the things that you can see on a graph, I don't have a visual of this, but you can see the actual temperatures of the chest freezer. Like for example, I'll see the chest freezer ambient temperature at 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and my beer is at 67. I can see that visual. Okay, so that's comforting to know that wow. I'm really controlling my temperatures correctly. And then what's even more interesting is that as the beer attenuates, you can see the ambient temperatures climb and meet.
The gap gets smaller.
Closes.
Yeah,
And so that gives me, I don't know, a lot of you listeners, probably ramp your beer temps to help a beer finish out. It's a common practice. If you got a big beer, I want to raise temps as my beer is attenuating. The brew pie gives you a visual to how far along is my attenuation because I see that gap closing and I'm not taking a gravity reading, but I can see the gap closing and that gives me an indicator that as the gap closes, I'm going to start cranking on the temperature to raise it up, and that gives me an indicator as to how much fermentation activity there is. Because if there's a lot, it is. That was something that took me blindsided. I didn't realize that I was going to be doing that, but I started after doing many brew days with this. I realized that I'm watching that ambient temperature and I'm using the exothermic properties of fermentation as an indicator of how far along I needed to pour that.
Oh yeah, get a pour.
I just got talking.
It's awesome.
I use the exothermic indicators of the fermentation to determine how far along this beer has been fermenting and to know I'm getting close to my final gravity because it's producing less heat. So fermentation is slowing down, and I use that as an indicator as when to start raising the temperature to help it finish out.
You okay there, Brandon?
I think it just popped a blood vessel in my head. Sorry about that. No, but that's really a good point is getting a good understanding of exactly what's going on during your fermentation. It just helps you understand what you need to do in terms of crafting your fermentation temperatures and your fermentation schedule for your next beer too.
Right.
And any of that data that helps you understand, okay, as this goes on, you can see where the fermentation activity tapers off.
Yep.
And you can see, well, maybe when I see these two temperatures start to converge at this point, once they're 3 or 4 degrees apart, that's where I want to start ramping up. Mm-hmm. You can almost use that as the same type of thing where you would measure your gravity.
That's what I was saying. I used to take a gravity reading, and when I'm within 25% of my final gravity, I start raising the temperature. Well, with the brew pie, I can visually see that fermentation is slowing down because I can see the ambient temperatures needed to keep the temperature where it's at. I can see that gap closing, and I can use that to say, okay, I think it's time to start raising this up a degree.
Because you hear pro brewers talk about that a lot. Once I get within a few degrees Plato or something like that,
you start raising.
Well, it's easier for them when they've got a sample port on the side of a big conical fermenter and they could just pull some. For us, we're having to open up a fermenter and put something into our beer and all that. And every time you do that, you're risking oxidation, you're risking infection, all kinds of different things. So being able to watch that on a graph and getting a good feel for what's going on with your fermentation and being able to say, okay, now is when I want to step my temperature up and that kind of thing. When you're getting into things like using English yeast extensively, where you've got to know, I've got to make sure that this gets done what it's going to do before it flocks out.
Yeah.
Or if you're getting into real high gravity fermentations where you need to make sure
that's
when it's really going nuts, I'm keeping the temperature low, and as it starts to taper off, I raise it up so that it keeps working and keeps working.
Yep.
That kind of information really, really helps you get exactly what you want out of a beer.
Well, and here's one point I want to make, because I think this is really important, especially for you beginners that have just started brewing beer. So many people really focus on recipe. and honestly, I think recipe is secondary.
Yeah, I agree.
I wasted the first like 9 months of my brewing hobby trying to formulate recipes, and I was like,
recipes.
I'm just gonna grab something from somebody that knows it's a good recipe. You're right; it's not the most important part.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, what they don't understand is the most important part, and this is really generic, and I really say this a lot in the store, but this is the God honest truth, is that we don't make beer. We just create an environment for a yeast to live in. And if you don't make the absolute exact wonderful environment for this yeast to live in, you're not going to make good beer. And so that's one of the things I always tell people. They're like, oh, I want to go all grain brewing. I'm like, okay, well, the first thing I always ask them, do you have a fermentation chamber, or do you have a refrigerator that you can control your fermentation, or do you have even a simple Johnson controller?
Yeah.
It's going to improve your quality of beer.
Well, and the thing
dramatically.
Too is, even though recipe, I agree with you on your point that recipe development is secondary and all that kind of thing. Recipe development and your process on the hot side is very, very important. It takes you a long time to get those things down. It's really a shame to do all of that right and then
not do the
toss the fermentation to the wind
just go, okay, it's room temp, whatever.
Yeah, you can ruin all the good stuff you did up to that point by not paying enough attention to your and I'm guilty of this. I am, just because I love the hot side of it so much. And then I throw my yeast in, and then I go on the road and travel or something like that, and it just sits at 63 or something for 2 weeks, and so I'm guilty of it. And this is something that gives you control. It gives you access to data to know what you're doing, and it's that extra degree of control and understanding.
I agree with you 100%, Brandon. And but here's what I'm saying, and this is the only point I was trying to get at. If you're not doing fermentation temperature control at all, got to do it.
You're wasting your time.
You're 100%
You're wasting
right.
your time. Yeah, I think you're right. Is that
I always say, if you're ever sitting on the couch drinking a beer that you think, man, this is fantastic, why can't I get my beer to taste like this beer? It's the fermentation. That's what it is.
Well,
it's the fermentation.
At the basic, go, find a used appliance store, search Craigslist, search 5 Mile, search your resale outlets, get you a refrigerator and a controller, and you might spend a couple $100.
So in basically what we're talking about tonight is doing that, exactly what you're talking about, Mikey, is getting the refrigerator, getting the temperature controller. But we're even talking about taking that to the next level.
We're going nerdy with it,
right? Yeah.
But
I mean,
at a minimum,
we want you, because I have a lot of times, people come into the store and they're, oh, I got the fermentation temperature control, woohoo! And you know what? If you put your probe in a refrigerator at ambient temperature, that's
that's what I want. I also want people to take away from this. You don't have to get nerdy with the Raspberry Pi. That's if you really want to go crazy,
right?
But that's better. That's better than like room ambient temperature.
Yeah, absolutely. But the thing I want people to take away from this is how you measure your temperature and what you're controlling it with. Right? Don't put your fermentation probe in a jar in water sitting in your chest freezer. Don't just leave it floating in the air. Don't use a thermal well unless you know where you're placing your thermal well, or you have some better way to control it. Tape it to the side of a glass carboy if you've got glass. If you've got plastic, make some adjustments. You know what? Somebody in the club also mentioned that, what they do when they have a plastic fermenter is, if you think about it, that chest freezer fills up with a lot of cold air. By the time that it cuts it off, there's a lot of cold air. Where's that cold air going to go? Straight into your beer, and it's going to cause your swings. What I've heard somebody else do is they throw a whole nother bucket in their chest freezer with water.
Yeah.
Just to absorb
that extra leftover cold air, and that slows down the swings. And I was like, wow, that's actually a great idea. And that's what they do. So,
that would be an interesting experiment just to see how that actually affected. I mean, just doing, do 2 different refrigerators side by side and just do one with a bucket of water and one without one, just to see the
You're
difference.
going to, because that cold air has nowhere to go except into your
It's
beer.
got to
But if you
absorb
have
into
a
some
whole-
sort of thermal mass.
It's
Right.
it's energy. It has
Add
to
more
go
thermal
somewhere.
mass in there. If it's just another carboy of water or a bucket of water or even bottles of beer, that thermal energy is going to go into those instead of your beer, and so your swings are going to be much less. So
If
it's
your
just a lot
dog
of,
dies, just put your dog in there.
Ooh.
He could be your thermal mass. Just something to soak up the.
It's raw, dude.
Right roll.
You've had so many quads, sir.
Yeah, let's talk cost here, because I think that's getting lost in this a little bit, in exactly how affordable everything that you're talking about is. It's insanely affordable, especially if you're talking about buying a 2-stage Johnson temperature controller or something. You're looking at spending $160 on that, pretty much $150-$160 minimum. Right. So what did you spend on?
So I think my out of pocket was about $100. And
Wow.
maybe it reached 125. So if you look at the picture, you can see the temperature probes on the right. You see the stainless bar. That's the probe. The other end of that is just what you would.
It's like an 1/8-inch headphone jack, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So when you buy these temperature probes, they're just bare wires at the other end. And so the way I wanted mine set up is I wanted the ability to plug in multiple probes, because the Raspberry Pi gives you the ability to measure a third temperature. And so I wanted the ability to plug in, and I thought phone jacks would be great because you can buy splitters, you can do some cool stuff. So I wired my stuff up to the probes to use phone jacks, but I've seen people use the RJ45s, like telephone wired jacks, to plug them in.
Yeah.
You just need a way to take a probe and plug it in. And so I chose the phone jacks because they're pretty easy, but those are that goes into the cost. So it's about $100 or so.
So you guys that are listening on the podcast, if you want to go back and want to see some of these graphics and pictures, the stuff that we're actually talking about, you can always go to our YouTube channel. And that is youtube.com/Texas Brewing. So you can watch it live there, where we're actually talking about it, and you can see all these stuff live.
I'd really encourage you to do that on this one too. The visuals on this are very striking, especially that last graph that we showed where Mike said, "Now there's another line that you can't see because it completely eclipses the black line."
Yeah.
That's really an important graphic.
Right there.
I mean, it's that one right there says a lot.
But I really want to know where he got this classic lunch tray that I used to get when I was in elementary.
Yeah, that's great.
That is Sean's. That's my brother-in-law, my brew partner. Those have been in his family. They're like the little project trays, and I don't know. We have a few of them, and that's where I got it.
I swear to God, I used to run through one of those in elementary, and
I mean, I see.
I want my Salisbury steak, please.
Ernest getting smacked in the face with it, and his whole face is in the tray.
Ernest, wow.
Ernest goes to camp. Yeah,
You are 40.
41.
That's what the kids play Play-Doh on, and that tray probably sat with a bunch of wires and shit for probably about 3 weeks.
It probably stopped you from losing little screws and stuff too.
It does,
So,
yeah. It's great for great for Legos.
Yeah,
Is that a waste management logo in the middle? What's the logo?
I don't know, but what's cool about the Brew Pi is that the Brew Pi software also is set up to allow you to do multiple chambers. So some people's builds, they put their Arduino, which is the controller, and the Brew Pi in one compartment in one project box. And so I separated mine out so that the controller is separate from the Brew Pi, the Raspberry Pi, so that if I ever had a second chamber, I could build another box for just the controller, and I could control multiple.
And you can control as many as you want.
Okay,
you would add an Arduino.
That second box, the one that was on top, I would just build another one of those.
Okay.
And it plugs in
Mike,
USB.
I think this is a good, important information for our listeners. Is if you're interested in doing some of this stuff, because it's all open source stuff, correct?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yep.
So, what would you suggest if somebody was interested in that? What websites to check out? Do you have certain resources?
Absolutely. I would go to Google and type in Homebrew Talk Brew Pi.
Okay, Brew Pi.
Yep. There is a forum post that I followed that has schematics, parts, links to go buy each part. It has everything. I did a similar write up on the Cap and Hair, but you know, I used to have my pictures saved on Google Drive, and Google Drive used to allow you to host pictures. Right. They changed that now, so I have to go through in that forum post and replace all the picture links, which I have not done. So right now the forum post just looks like a bunch of question marks. But
well, maybe we can get some of your posts and actually put them into our blog.
Post.
Let me know. I can give you all the information. That'd
be awesome, dude.
But Homebrew Talk, there's been a lot of there's a thread that's got 100 pages on it, and you know, Adreno is the old school way to do it apparently, because when I first ventured on this project a year and a half ago, the Spark is a newer chipset.
Okay.
And you know, the BrewPi supports that as well. So if I were to do this project over again, because the Spark is the new way, I would probably just do that.
Right.
I don't have no idea what the difference is because I barely know what the Adreno is. But that just goes to show you don't have to know exactly what it is. You just got to be able to wire it up and put it in a project box.
Well, what's so funny is the power of these little Raspberry Pis or whatever. That's what I was using as a major computer 15 years ago. These are just little, like,
it's probably
they're basically like a 46 SX or DX.
Probably 10 times more powerful than what was on the Voyager probe.
Yeah, probably so.
Which was like an Atari 8600.
Yeah.
It might be old Atari parts that they're making.
And there's something to be said about that, because even though we're using these massive computers, I mean, man, what I have on my iPhone now, I when I was a kid, I would never expected that people say, "Oh, you could do all of this and this," and I was expecting flying cars by now. Damn it!
No
but
shit.
We got these amazing phones that do everything. But I'm just saying that simple processes that we're using for brewing. These little small computers can handle those those processes, and they're very inexpensive. They're very cheap. So there's a lot of different resources that you can find that you can use Raspberry Pi or. I think there's a lot of them out there right now, isn't there?
Now, as I understand it too, you have to be fairly computer literate to be able to install this software and get it running. Is that correct?
Well, that's what I was saying earlier. I think that
it's Linux based or something.
It's Linux based, but if you can follow instructions, you type in these things, you don't have to know what you're typing. You just have to type it.
Okay.
So I did run into a problem at one point where it wasn't able to download a package or something, and I knew enough about the way that packages were handled in Linux to be able to work around the problem. I think that was a temporary issue, but I think that those who are a little bit scared about doing it, the best advice I can give you is you don't step slowly into a cold pool of water. You jump in and do it. So I think
also
that
you have
the
the best currency in the world, which is free beer, and everybody knows somebody that knows computers, and give them a bunch of free beer and have them flash your hardware. And
we were just talking about engineers are one of the largest.
Just don't flash your package.
I don't want to see you flash your hardware.
At least not from the closet, right?
Yeah, do not step out of the closet flashing your hardware.
If you want to do stuff like, I want to be able to access my stuff over the internet, you're going to have to know a little bit about how to set that up. But I think that if you're in a homebrew community,
know somebody who does know a little bit and likes beer.
Yep. If you're in a homebrew community,
that guy.
I think that there's enough engineers in the community where they could say, "Oh yeah, I can set that up. It's pretty easy."
Well, and I think
the problem is their lack of social skills.
I think
that is true.
But boom. But I would say that I think you're right in that respect. Mike, I think really, if you're involved in a homebrew community, probably more than likely somebody's going to be well versed in some sort of computer language, or they can help you set this stuff up. And really, a lot of the times, the stuff that you're trying to accomplish, and once you get it set up, there's nothing else you really got to do. I mean, it's kind of like a plug and play at that point. I mean, once you figure all that stuff out. So
I will say this thing has been running. I haven't rebooted it. It's been running for a year and a half. I think I'm sure the electricity has recycled through a lightning storm at some point, but I don't mess with it. I just go in there and it's always up.
Well, and here's proof in the pudding. This guy he turns out some unbelievable, phenomenal beers.
Sometimes.
Once or
You
twice.
mean like
Sometimes.
every single competition that you enter where
Sometimes.
you... Yeah. What have you and Sean been homebrewing team of the year for 3 or 4 years straight?
No, we missed a year. You guys beat us. The Texas Brewing guys beat us one year.
Oh, really? Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
it was Pete.
Oh,
and
that's
Greg.
right. Pete and Greg. I
Greg
forgot
won,
about that. Yeah.
Yeah, we're holding it. We're holding the title. No, I think we're going into we're transition. It's actually kind of difficult, which you wouldn't think it would matter, but we've been doing a lot of competitions and we're kind of just worn out.
Yeah.
And transition.
I was seeing you guys
transitioning.
is
No,
off
we're
in
done.
it, yeah.
We're done with competitions for a while, except for the Blue Bonnet and
Right,
Nationals.
right.
But transitioning from a competition mindset to a non-competition mindset, it's actually been kind of hard. It's kind of been rough because competition motivates you, and when you decide you're not competing anymore, you're like,
I don't know,
you're
man.
changing your source of motivation, and it's a little rough. I mean, we're
Drinking
brewing.
beer that I like is a much better motivation to me.
It's a good motivation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's-
Yeah,
Well,
but
it's
but the thing is, though, Brandon, here's the thing I'll say about competition is that drives you to make better beer that you can drink.
No, you're
Yes.
right. You're right.
You know?
But when you're brewing to make sure you hit parameters that are going to do well in competition, as opposed to,
I
would
that.
kind of
I
like
get
it
that.
if it had this. You know.
Yeah, I wish more local breweries would brew to competition standards.
Well-
I'm just saying.
Well, I'll give you that for sure. Yeah.
But like this English IPA that I brought, if I were brewing for competition, I wouldn't have used all SO4, but I did this time because I wanted to see what it was like.
Right.
And so it's a different mindset.
Where's that
and-
beer? I didn't get that one.
Yeah,
It's around here.
Is this it right here?
no, that's a Scotch ale.
Oh, is this a Scotch ale? Oh.
Is it right there?
Yeah, you probably don't necessarily want it, but
No,
it's this mind. It's just a different mindset, and your motivation is different, and so it's an adjustment. It's been an adjustment for me. Brewing for pure pleasure of just I want to try this. I want to try this is different from I'm trying to achieve a certain goal in competition.
Right.
It just.
Well, you always go through ebbs and flows in your brewing life, what your goal is and that kind of thing.
Well,
and-
let me ask you this, though. I think that's a curious and great subject. Why did you decide you didn't want to do competition stuff anymore? Because it's just too much work? Or?
Yeah. No.
Okay.
We no. I think it really came down to the last couple of years we tried to get the Texas Team of the Year, the Lone Star Circuit,
Well, yeah.
and so we tried. Last year we had a really great start. We had accumulated more
Right.
points the first half of the year than anybody had ever gotten in any prior year, and we were really like, let's do this. And there were
Right.
2 or 3 other teams that wanted it more. And those guys would turn out 14 beers and entries into every competition.
Right.
And
And-
I talked to them at Blue Bonnet.
Yeah.
I talked to each of those guys. And I'm like, man, we just couldn't keep up with you guys. They're like, yeah, I mean, we're trying to start a brewery. We're brewing like, 3 batches, every couple of weeks. And those guys, it just takes a level that, Sean and I are like,
It's not worth it.
we
Yeah.
want it, but hats off to these guys. They're working their ass off
Hey, you
for
know
this,
what, though?
and you know what? That we're going to concede to that.
it's all
I
about
can't-
getting what you want out of it.
When
you
Mike-
know, it's funny you said that because I've seen a lot of breweries go through that whole process, and they feel like they need some validation.
Yeah.
Hey, we gotta win all these things, and we're gonna brew all this stuff, and we're gonna win all these competitions. Most of them fall flat.
That's okay. It was just it gets to a certain level of competitiveness where it's like I can't put more. I can't we
Right.
can't brew
Well,
enough.
you're not.
to do
It's not
that.
enjoyable.
So
you have to do it in
Well,
a way that you.
Well,
would
we're all
enjoy it.
doing this for a hobby,
Right.
for the most
Yeah.
part, and we're having fun with it, and I think that's the biggest thing that me personally running a homebrew store that I see. Why can't you just freaking enjoy brewing beer and
Well, that's
making
exactly
good
right,
beer
yeah.
rather than, okay, I brew great beer. Wow, now I got to start a freaking brewery.
Yeah.
And I see so many people go through this transition, and I'm like, man, just freaking enjoy brewing.
Well, I can
great
tell you
beer.
what, it's been the past 2 or 3 years. We brew beer and I keg it, and I can't drink the beer because I have to bottle it for competition, and I have
Right.
to hold on to it because I got this one coming up. I got this one coming up.
Yeah.
The last 3
It's
months,
not fun.
the last 3 months have been great. You know why? Because
You're just
I'll
drinking it.
drink 3 pints of my own beer, and I'm like,
This is great.
It is. It's a different mindset. It's weird. It's like I can sit here and drink all my beer. I know most of the guys listening to this are probably like, well, I do that all the time anyway. But when you don't have that, it's like it's so much fun to just sit there and drink my beer, and I don't have to worry about reserving any of it. I got friends over. You know what I do when I have friends over? I lift up my keys, or I disconnect the kegs that I don't want people to drink of. Because why? Because I'm saving it for competition.
Yeah.
The last time at a party, I was like,
Load it up, baby.
Drink whatever you want.
Yeah.
And they're like, really? And I'm like, yeah, drink whatever you want.
And I think that
It's great. It's a different mindset.
And I think you nailed it right on the head. And I think a lot of people really miss that as a home brewer. And I think the biggest joy for me as being a home brewer is just being able to go, hey, this is my creation. Enjoy it. People love it.
Well, you did tonight with
sharing.
that quad. There is nothing better than opening up a bottle of your beer and having several people go, man,
I would pay money for
this
that.
is great.
Yeah.
And that's the thing for me is I spend all my life trying to hit targets and schedule things and all that stuff. The last thing I want to do when I'm brewing is to have to do it on a schedule. And
Brandon, here's the thing with that quad that I'll let you guys drink tonight. Mm-hmm. I think that's a fantastic beer. I really enjoy it. It's not the greatest beer in the world. I'm not saying that.
It's
I really
pretty
enjoy
damn
it.
good.
I really
good.
like it. It's good. But you know what? If I was a commercial brewer trying to make that beer, I would go broke.
mm-hmm.
Because I couldn't.
Yeah.
I couldn't allow it to age like I did. Let it do. I couldn't afford. I mean, I couldn't let it just sit there the way that I did as a home brewer.
There are commercial brewers putting out that beer.
Yeah, but maybe they got a lot more money than most of them do. But I'm just saying,
they foster
you know what I
a
mean?
culture, a following that
But
understands what they're doing.
I think that's one of the benefits that we have as being home brewers is we can allow stuff to age where a lot of commercial breweries can't afford to do that. You know, especially in those higher alcohol beers, and so that. I guess a lot of the times, I guess I get frustrated with people that are great home brewers that come in and they go, "Oh yeah, we're brewing. Oh, we're going to open a brewery," and I'm like, "Well, why? What is?"
Well, to each their own, man. I mean,
I'm not just saying that, but can you not just enjoy making really great beer for
think
you
you
and
wanna
your
lose a
friends?
customer.
I think what it is like at the end of a brew day, like when Sean and I will brew, even a double brew day, at the end of the day, I'm worn out and I'm exhausted and I'm like, but that's just so much fun. I would love to do this every day.
right.
I like, you're hanging out, you're listening to music, you're using your hands.
Come
You
work
know.
at
Well,
Texas
and it's
Brewing.
the idea of creating something and putting it out there in the world,
But
and having it enrich other people's
Yeah.
lives. That's what
But
it is.
I don't think. But most people think that's what open a brewery is. Is you're hanging out, you're
Yeah,
drinking beer.
I know.
You're making this concoction. You're brewing it up.
Well, you're right.
But they don't understand the financing, the business aspect, the
vast majority of people have
it's
never
just-
owned a business
oh my
before. They
God.
don't understand
because
Yeah.
that's a small aspect of opening a brewery is actual brewing and making great beer. You know what? You can make the most unbelievable beer on the planet, but if you don't know how to market it, you don't know how to do finance, and you don't know how to. It's going to fail miserably.
Right. Yeah.
You can be the best brewers on the planet and fail at opening a brewery. So, I guess I see so many people come in all the time. They're like, oh, I'm opening a brewery.
Man,
I'm like,
I don't know.
okay.
Have you ever been to the Labor of Love?
Yeah, many times.
Like Sean and I went the first time to that competition last year, and we showed up. We printed out our brewery name with Google Docs. Like I taped it onto a piece of cardboard and hung it on our tent.
Yeah, I did the same thing. Yeah.
You go to this competition where all these home
Oh
brewers
my
are coming
God,
out to serve
dude.
their beer, and these guys have
like
T-shirts
T-shirts
and koozies and stickers.
Yep.
banners. I mean, these guys are on the cusp of opening a brewery, and this is not just 1 or 2 guys. These are like 30 people.
Right. Yeah,
we're walking around, and I'm like, I want to try your beer, and there's 3 or 4 people all wearing the same shirts. They're like ready to serve my beer, and they're like, "Here, have a sticker, have a koozie, have a," and it's like
that's long been my problem with Iron Mash. The People's Choice thing always comes down to presentation.
But these people are so serious about like it's what Stubby's saying. There's so I mean, it's
true.
It was an eye-opener how many people are ready to do this.
I think they start to lose the whole purpose of making homebrew. Is because because I look at it from a standpoint of, we're creating something for ourselves and our friends, but then your friends tell you, hey, you know what, you could sell this shit, hey, you know what, I could sell most of my homebrew stuff. That doesn't mean I can make a brewery,
right?
There's a big difference between, and I've seen it time and time again. I have so many friends that they're unbelievable homebrewers, and I can assure you, they start breweries. Their breweries beer is never even close to their homebrew.
It's never as good.
It's never as good. It's not even close. And I've seen it so many times, time and time and time again. It's because you're brewing on a massive scale, but you're not having that same labor of love for that little small batch that you are.
I get that question all the time when someone finds out, oh, you make beer. Do you sell this, or do you want to open a brewery? I'm like, not in your life. I mean, I wanted to at one point, and then I started really, it was before I really got into the club, before I started working at the shop, and
well, you meet people that have gone down that path. You meet those guys, and you see that wow, it's a lot more than just making beer.
When I retire,
if I had it my way tomorrow, I would open a brew pub. Absolutely,
I love
without a doubt.
Yeah,
you got to have a lot of money though.
I love making beer
and run a restaurant too.
Yeah,
right. Well, no, you get somebody to run the restaurant.
If I win the lottery and I have millions of dollars, there's no question.
Sure,
I'm going to spend it on just doing what I love to do. But
that's the joy of homebrewing is just making beer that you like, drinking the beer that you like, and sharing it with your friends. So.
Yeah. So anyway, I know we're way off track of what we were talking about tonight, but Mike,
I blame Mike.
It's all your fault, dude.
I love derailing conversations. It's an art form.
I think this is really good conversation. If anything, for you guys that whether you be a beginner or a really seasoned pro, I think these are things that you need to look at as far as to maybe something you can even spark and make your beer even better is to look into some of these different automation or whether it be the
it's all deciding what makes this fun for you, what you enjoy the most. And for some people, the automation side of it and tinkering with the equipment, getting the hot side of it to run on more of a professional level is what it is. And you know what? If that's what it is, go do it. There's so many resources and so many great things out there.
And I think, Brandon, what I was even getting into a rudimentary more element than that is how can we make better beer? And these are different ways that you can improve the quality of your beer.
Yeah.
And it's all about, we've talked about
you can improve the control.
Yeah. Anytime you control.
Then it's up to you to make it better.
Anytime you can make your beer, you control the process of making your beer more linear, or you can make your beer more consistent, the better control you have over your overall brewing process. So you know what I mean? But whether it be your brewing process or your fermentation process, if you can be more consistent and keep it more linear and not have any kind of differentiation in whatever you're doing, is you're going to make better beer, right? Because if you decide you want to change a variable, that's the only variable that's being changed, rather than my fermentation's all over the place, but I changed this one aspect. It's not going to be in my fermentation. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? I mean, because
it does, yes.
So maybe I'm trying to pound on something that, that's not my wife. But anyway.
Well, hey there. Whoa. All right. So in upcoming episodes, we're gonna talk more
we'll
about
edit
the
that out.
Irex malt. That's we've talked about Irex a couple times. I brought in a couple beers I brewed.
Coming
with
up,
it.
it's coming up soon. 6 to 8
And,
weeks, baby.
let me tell you, this malt is something that you're going to want to pay attention to. It's a game changer as far as I'm concerned, and then there's several aspects about it. We'll talk about that more later, but you should listen up for that. We are going to be talking about some water testing that we've done too. We've got samples from all over this area that we're going to compare to our actual local water information and kind of check it against what
That
they're
sounds
telling us
cool.
is in there and what the lab says is in there and all that kind of thing. So that should be really interesting. Again, please make sure to go to Patreon and check out ways that you can support the show. We really appreciate every little bit. We have a lot of supporters now, and we appreciate everything that they're doing.
Yeah,
It makes
thank
a
you,
big
guys.
difference. Yes. So thanks again for listening to Come and Brew It Radio. Be sure to share with your friends on social media. Give us some ratings on iTunes and Stitcher. And send any ideas or comments to info@texasbrewinginc.com. Also, you can always check in on the brew days of our guys at the brew-focused Facebook pages at Brew with Stubby, Brew with Brando, Brew with Mikey B, Brew with Pete, and Brew with Greg.
As
And
always,
come and brew it.
come and brew
I
it.
remember it.
Happy come and brew it, Mikey.
Happy
Yeah,
come and brew it.
happy birthday, old fucker. No, I said the F word.
He said sucker. I think he said sucker.
I said a sucker.
It's all right.
Yeah,
Actually,
you-
we've done a
Old
lot better
sucker.
on that in the last in
F-bomb?
recent
Yeah.
history. We've been good. We've been good. Mike had one